Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome from The Hague. I'm Donna Farazan, and I am honored to be your Master of Ceremonies for today and tomorrow's NATO Public Forum from The Hague Plenary Program. We are coming to you live from the heart of the NATO Summit venue right here in The Hague, where in just a short while, leaders from across the alliance will gather for 2 days as part of the summit of heads of state and government, an important moment for transatlantic unity and global security. Alongside this historic gathering, we will soon be opening the official plenary program of the NATO Public Forum, NATO's flagship public event that brings together voices from government, civil society, industry, media, and youth to engage in open dialogue on the NATO summit agenda. Now, there's a lot happening over the next 2 days, and as the summit gets underway and leaders begin to arrive, we will also be welcoming our in-person guests to this space as we launch the public forum. This year, we're doing things a little differently. In addition to our main stage conversations you'll see here, we're introducing a dynamic TV-style studio show that will set the tone for each day, with live commentary, expert analysis, and engaging discussions. These segments, airing before and after the plenary sessions and during breaks, are designed to unpack key moments and offer valuable context around developments at both the forum and the summit itself. And leading us through this exciting new format, I am so pleased to announce it will be my brilliant new friend from the Netherlands, the wonderful host, Ikenna Azwike. Hi, Ikenna.
Good morning, Donna. What an introduction. Oh, my goodness. Thank you.
I'm so happy to see you, and I know you will be at the helm of so much going on. What do you have for us over there?
Yes, well, you're absolutely right. You've already said a lot. We're here to kick off over here, and it's big first day of school energy. But I guess, okay, what is Studio Bravo? Well, while Studio Alpha handles the main program, think suits, scripts, perhaps choreographed handshakes, here in Bravo we're doing things a little differently, like you said, TV talk show style. So deep dives with high-level experts, a little bit more context and reflection on what gets talked about on your stage.
So we're a little bit of the buttoned up and you're a little bit of the buttoned down.
Yeah, if you like, if you like.
Well, I know it's going to be engaging overall, and I'm so excited to start our program as well as yours. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
You're very welcome. Thanks very much, Donna.
All right.
Right, so good morning. Yes, everyone. Welcome to this first ever session here at Studio Bravo, the NATO Summit. In a bit more detail, what is Studio Bravo? Well, think of it like a pop-up talk show, but with fewer celebrity breakups and significantly more geopolitics. My name is Ikenna Azwike, and it's my pleasure to be your host over the next couple of days. Now, as I alluded to in my conversation with Donna just now, our opening show is all about the why. Why are we gathered here? Why now? And why does resilience, be it political, economic, even psychological, matter when it comes to improving our security? To help unpack all of that, we have some wonderful, knowledgeable people at the desk just behind me. So let's go meet them. Lovely. Thank you for that spontaneous round of applause, audience. We didn't rehearse anything. Minister, you and your team must have had a lot of sleepless nights, drunk a lot of coffee, caffeine, in the run-up to this. How does it feel now that the curtain's up and the day's finally here?
I'm glad you had some makeup here to make sure that we looked a bit appropriate. No, these are anxious days, but at the same time, we've been preparing for this for over a year, and we've rehearsed all the scenarios, we've done all the repetitions, so actually everyone's eager to get started.
Yeah. Before we continue, let me introduce everyone who's at the table here, because we've got yourself, Minister of Justice and Security of the Netherlands, Mr. David van Meel. We've got from the Geopolitics and Security Studies Center in Lithuania, also a host of past NATO summits, Linas Kojala. We have from the Atlantic Council's Europe Center in the US, Rachel Rizzo. Welcome. And the director of the Atlantic Association in the Netherlands, Anna van Zoest. Okay, right, before we get even further into it, we've got a short video which I think captures a little bit of just what's gone into organizing this, frankly, colossal event.
Het is echt een mega-operatie.
Het wordt wel de grootste logistieke operatie van Nederland genoemd.
We hebben geleerd van Litouwen, 2 jaar geleden de top, van afgelopen jaar in Washington. Wat waren daar de ervaringen?
Het oog van de wereld kijkt naar Den Haag.
Ongeveer 6000 deelnemers, heel veel hoogwaardigheidsbekleders uit alle lidstaten. Nou, de beveiliging die daarbij komt kijken, de mobiliteit.
Meer dan de helft van de hele Nederlandse politie is ingezet. We kunnen niet groter dan dit.
Ja, we hebben een aantal bijzondere klanten, om het zo maar te zeggen, die gewoon een hoger veiligheidsrisico lopen. Welk hotel zet je ze neer? Wat kunnen we wel accommoderen, wat kan er niet?
En wij zijn echt verantwoordelijk voor de veiligheid en alle facetten daaromheen. Dus wij werken heel veel samen met andere partners, Koninklijke Marechaussee, met Defensie.
Omdat de situatie in de wereld echt is veranderd, geopolitiek, betekent het dat er risico's wel hier en daar wat toegenomen zijn. Er zitten ook risico's op cybergebied. Dat vraagt ook extra aandacht en extra specialisme.
Wij weten dat Russen de afgelopen 2 jaar zo'n 190 sabotage en desinformatie en cyberaanvallen hebben uitgevoerd op ons Europees grondgebied.
Het is maar een paar dagen, maar er zit heel veel voorwerk in. En tegelijkertijd levert het Nederland ook veel op.
Het belang van de NAVO-top groeit met de dag.
Ik heb een spuughekel aan bouwhekken met zwarte zeilen erin. Een beetje transparantie, zak 5 in.
Ja, ik denk dat het voor Den Haag een hele mooie gelegenheid is, hè? Stad van vrede en recht. Ja, ik vind het mooi dat we deze mogelijkheid hebben als land zijnde dan, zeg maar, dat we dit soort dingen kunnen organiseren. Zeker weten.
Now, that definitely gives us a little bit of a taste of what's gone into organising this. One of the speakers mentioned there, though, the situation in the world is changing. We've all seen that, rapidly, so fluid, even the last, let's say, 72 hours in particular. Were there moments, I mean, that obviously has an impact on the summit. Were there moments you had concerns, David?
Well, I've had many concerns over the past year, but what we did was basically look at all the potential risks that we run. So whether they're state actor-based, whether they're terrorists, whether they're activists or extremists, cyber attacks, you name it. We had over 40 scenarios that we took into account. So the recent events that unfolded fell within the picture that the bar that we set for security here at the summit.
Yeah.
So nothing extra needed to be done. I think you're probably in one of the safest spaces in the world right now, especially here in The Hague, or when you land at Schiphol Airport, but we need to be alert.
Yeah. I mean, you can't, scenario planning is of course essential, but you can't plan for everything. And it makes me wonder, I mean, this morning, there were news reports about trains being, there are no more trains running between Amsterdam and The Hague because cables have been cut. I mean, is it too cynical to think that, that could be a sabotage?
No, that could be a sabotage. That's one of the things that we're looking into. And then the question is, who was behind it? That can be activist group, it can be state actor-led, it can be any kind. The main thing we're trying to do now is make sure that those cables get repaired and that we get the traffic flowing, because in combination with the summit where we close down highways and people rely on public transport a lot more, of course this is an extra nuisance and an extra challenge, but
yeah.
We'll fix it.
And despite all the challenges, the expense, the logistical challenges, Linas, what's the value of face-to-face gatherings like this?
Look, first of all, kudos to the organizers. You age quickly, during the process. It's a difficult one, but also very enriching one.
Yeah.
So I think we cannot replace direct contact with people, direct conversations, and the public forum really adds up to the main summit because it extends the audience of the decisions being made at NATO. It directs connection with the audiences in various countries at NATO and outside of NATO, and because we need to explain those decisions. Those decisions are usually difficult. They involve spending more money on defense. They involve, building up resilience. They involve understanding of the changing geopolitical environment. So in order for us to be kind of fully ready for all of the scenarios, we have to involve the academia, the think tanks, but also, a regular citizen of a NATO country.
Yeah.
So I think NATO Public Forum really plays that role.
Yeah, but I mean, Rachel, you've been involved in public forums before. We could do this on Zoom, couldn't we?
I mean, sure, you could do it on Zoom, but I think it would be pretty uninspiring. I don't remember the last time I was truly inspired by a Zoom call. It's been quite some time. But no, I think that what you said is correct. There's no replacing in-person conversations and the spontaneity and sort of serendipity that comes from those conversations. In-person, face-to-face meetings, I think, show the sort of cohesion that not just would-be adversaries are looking for, but that citizens are looking for as well. Of course, that cohesion has been difficult over the last few years, just given this new U.S. president and sort of how he feels about the alliance, but I'm heartened by the high-level statements that have come from people like Marco Rubio and the U.S. Ambassador to NATO about the U.S. commitment to NATO, and hopefully that's something that we can highlight and show over the next few days.
Okay, but let's build on that a little bit. What do you think is at stake at this summit, bearing in mind the context you just sketched out?
Well, I mean, one thing that we talk about is, societal cohesion and resilience. There's a reason that societal cohesion is so important, because when there are cracks and fissures within that, it's easily exploitable, and our would-be adversaries, I think, look for that. And so what's at stake now, I mean, last year in Washington was the 75th anniversary of NATO. It was a huge summit. We were meeting in Washington where the Washington Treaty was signed 75 years prior. And I think that the stakes have only grown over the last year. There are, this is almost a cliche phrase, but we're living in unprecedented geopolitical times. But I think that's true. I mean, even just given what's happened over the last couple of weeks and certainly the last few days. But I think showing that cohesion, coming away from the summit with the agreement to increase defense spending for the Europeans, I mean, these are things that are on the line, but it will also affect how Europe is able to defend itself for decades to come.
Okay, so cohesion, increased defense spending, kind of a unity Europe-wide. Anna, that says a lot already, but what would make this summit a success from your point of view?
This summit is very much about security and what is needed to stay safe in Europe, in North America. That's what we're going to talk about. It's also very much about Europe giving a very clear signal to the United States that it's ready to step up. So it's also very much about transatlantic relations, about the transatlantic bond, and ultimately these are decisions about war, about peace, about money. Decisions that will affect millions of people, and we really need to build a bridge between what's discussed here and what people in their home countries experience from day to day. And that's what we're doing with the public forum.
Is the bottom line, though, just money at the end of the day? Is that really what's going to do this? Is it the 5%? As soon as we hit that, then everyone's going to be, the Americans are going to be happy?
Well, in all honesty, I think what's going to happen and be decided today and tomorrow is incredibly important, but the hard work is still to come. Because as we move into fall and into the next years, governments will have to translate those decisions into actual actions in NATO countries. And that's where governments, but also citizens and voters will have to make up their minds.
Okay. Bearing in mind everything we've heard about the summit goals and what would make it a success, Linas, from your point of view, you were involved in the organization of the Vilnius Summit, NATO Summit in 2023, as well as a public forum. What did you learn from hosting that we should keep in mind today?
Well, these summits are of existential importance for countries such as Lithuania, but others as well. I'll tell you a short personal anecdote. I was walking on a street in Vilnius just a couple of months ago, and I comment on international affairs for many years, so people recognize me sometimes. And a woman approached me, and I don't know the woman at all. She was well-dressed, very smart, and she asked me a question. Is your daughter still in Lithuania? Which was not related to my family. It was related to my perception of security of the country and whether I'm kind of asking my family to leave already because the Russians are approaching. Because the Zapad exercises will take place in September because Russia is always threatening.
Zapad exercises?
Yeah, that's the exercises that take place every 2 years by Russia and Belarus, and they are obviously always involve scenarios of possibly attacking some neighboring countries, and usually those neighboring countries are the Baltic ones.
Right.
So, and you know, just a couple of days ago, Putin said that where the Russian soldier steps on, that's Russia. So that's basically the threat we are facing. So I see the summits as, you know, a continuous process of making us more resilient and deterring the threat, which is obviously an increasing in size to some extent. So we have to be ready. And I think NATO's strength lies at deterrence. It was able to deter various threats for many, many years, except 9/11. NATO's Article 5 was never invoked, which is a great success story. And I hope this summit will build on this legacy and continue to make NATO even stronger.
And do you mind if I ask, is your daughter still in? I think we all want to know. You put it out there.
Well, hopefully I'll have to send my message to my wife. But yes, we don't plan on leaving because I think that's also a part of the psychological operation, you know, launched by Russia to scare people, to make them less keen on investing in their own countries, spending their time there. So I think we have to be resilient in that regard as well. Obviously, look at the reality on the ground, but also not to get overly anxious just because of some threats coming from the east.
Yeah. Okay, well, some threats is putting it mildly, but yeah.
And politically correct.
Thank you very much. And politically correct, yes. Anna, the Atlantic Commission was involved in the organisation of this NATO event and the public forum. What's that process been like for you?
So the Netherlands Atlantic Association is working very closely with NATO and the Dutch government and colleagues from the Klingendahl Institute, the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, to other think tanks here in The Hague on shaping the program that you'll see unfold today and tomorrow. We're hugely excited because we're really trying to turn the summit inside out, to have the leaders come to the stage and explain why decisions have been taken and what it means for all of us. But we've also tried to use the wealth of knowledge and experience amongst participants and put those leading voices on NATO and the transatlantic bond, put them around the table, make sure that they have a chance to comment and to analyze. So you'll see leaders explaining the decisions top down, but also all of us here around this table with you, Ikenna, discussing and analyzing what these decisions are going to mean for us.
Yeah.
Analyzing what these decisions are going to mean for us.
Yeah, and I said Atlantic Commission, I meant Atlantic Association, of course, thanks. How does this particular edition differ from previous ones? Have you been to a previous public forum?
I have indeed, and I am sitting here with great respect for my Lithuanian and American colleagues who have worked very, very hard on previous summits and previous editions of NATO public forums. So they know the massive puzzle that we have to lay with people arriving at different times and scripts and table settings. And it's a huge logistical exercise, but it's also very much about fleshing out what decisions really need to be explained and given the stage. What is this summit really about, and what do people want to hear more about, and making sure that we design a program that's both informative but also interesting enough for people to follow at home.
And in terms of the difference between, I mean, Rachel, this is the first time I've been at the public forum. For me, I mean, the level of security is extremely high. Is that normal? Is this is it more heightened now, would you say?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is, for any of us who have been to previous public forums, I mean, you've never seen so many policemen and women in such a small area.
Military.
I mean, absolutely. This is, like you said, Minister, this is probably one of the safest places in the world you could be right now. And it was the same for Washington. You know, I've been in Washington for almost 12 years now. So you get used to seeing security, and you know what that's like, and you live around it and amongst it. But when you have not even just 32 world leaders, but more than that, with the leaders of the Indo-Pacific countries coming as well. When you have all of them descending on Washington, it's a very small city, in just a matter of a couple of days. You see the nature of the city really change. And for people that aren't involved in the public forum or aren't involved in foreign policy and national security, it can be a little bit unnerving, because you're walking down the street and you're walking by, you know, Humvees and armored vehicles and tanks. I haven't seen any here, but I'm sure they're around. And so the effort that goes into that, just making sure that it goes off without a hitch. I mean, that's just what you see in front. Everything that's going on behind the scenes, like you were mentioning, it's like a duck on a pond. Everything looks like it's fine, but underneath the feet are going really quickly. So just making sure that everyone gets there on time and plans it well.
I'm disappointed we haven't seen any heavily armed or armor-plated bicycles. That would have been.
Yeah, well, next time.
Next time. There's always room.
Everyone's taking notes for the next summit.
Anna, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to pitch in, because I think, you know, we all realize how much this summit also asks from a country and a city, and people having to deal with traffic disruptions. And, you know, I saw the gentleman on the video complaining about these big sort of gates that are being put up. And I think that makes it even more important to really try to bridge that divide between what's happening on the international stage and the big sort of decision making that we don't really get to see, or only in part, and making sure that's somehow disclosed for a wider audience.
Yeah. And talking about decision-making, you know, I saw one newspaper headline that framed this summit as 32 countries involved, although it's actually 45, but nevertheless, 32 countries involved, but only one man matters. What do you think? Anna, I suspect that man might be one of your countrymen. What do you think about?
My countrymen? I mean, it's true. As I mentioned before, I mean, I think that what these NATO summits have turned into is sort of a how do we keep the United States, how do we keep one man, Donald Trump, what I like to say, engaged rather than enraged. But at this point, we have watched this movie 5 times. We know how Trump feels about NATO. We know what he said about the Europeans. But we also know what other members of the administration have said about NATO. And so my hope is that NATO tells its story and Europeans tell their story, because it's a good story to tell. There were 8 members of the alliance that were spending the target of 2% of GDP on defense when Biden entered office. By the time he left office, that number had jumped to 23. That is a great story for NATO to tell to Donald Trump entered office. By the time he left office, that number had jumped to 23. That is a great story for NATO to tell to Donald Trump. And I think that there is a worry amongst some in Europe that if Europe does more, the United States will do less. Well, if this administration is planning on doing less anyways, which I think it perhaps will be, then Europe does need to do more. I am of the mind, though, that Europe doing more will actually keep the Americans more engaged. And so let's see how these conversations turn out over the next couple of days. I think there might be turnout over the next couple of days. I think there might be some other distractions that are, you know, going on, but that might actually be a good thing for NATO.
Okay.
Yeah.
And about those conversations, it's obviously super important how those conversations are perceived. Anna, you talked about the general public already. I'm wondering, Minister, again, given the global situation, instability, seems to be a new unraveling every 24 hours. What should people at home, the people on the stream watching this, what should they understand about our collective security?
Well, I think people are starting to understand. I entered the Royal Dutch Navy in 1994, and every month you saw a frigate being scrapped and the port emptying up, and defense was seen as something for professionals in conflicts far away from home, and nothing to do with life here in the Netherlands, far away from the front line. I used to joke up until a few years ago that if you blocked people from paying by bank card in one supermarket in Amsterdam, you would have a national crisis. I mention Amsterdam for a specific reason, coming from Rotterdam. But this was the kind of resilience that we were in. We didn't believe in war anymore, and that's why we stopped investing in it. I think people really understand now, having seen the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, having seen how Russia acts, having seen all the attacks and sabotage that we're already seeing, that defense matters, that security is something that without security, all the rest doesn't matter anymore. You need security as a base.
Do you think they really feel the need to bring that sense of collective security into their homes, though? I feel people read it and we see it and you're worried about it, you're anxious. But what can people themselves and families do to prepare for rougher times?
It's a good question. We need a sort of a cultural change. And especially in a country that's been far away from the eastern border, that's hard to do. And I see myself as a guinea pig. So I started when I came into office with sitting in talk shows and talking about the need to have a 48-hour emergency package. So that when something happens, it doesn't have to be a war, it can be floods, it can be electricity blackouts, that people can take care of themselves because the government might not be there. And in the beginning, people were laughing at that. And you would have one hand going up if somebody asked if they would survive for 48 hours. Now we're nearing the 40% of people that have prepared themselves for 72 hours or longer. We see that municipalities are looking at emergency gathering points, at shelters, at having emergency stocks in the house. Companies are looking at their supply chains. So yeah, I do think that we're slowly waking up that this is reality and we need to prepare.
And you mentioned the Eastern Front, Linus, in Lithuania, what's it like there? How ready is the public there? Do they have 72-hour go bags?
Well, we still have work to do. Obviously, our defense spending is going up. Next year, it's going to be 5.25% of GDP, so that's obviously a very high number. And that involves a lot of spending.
Civil readiness as well, though?
Yeah, civil readiness as well, because we've had this issue for many years. I mean, the issue of Russia being our neighbor, meaning that we have to be, agile in reacting to any circumstances. So hybrid threats are not something that we have been facing since 2014 or 2022. We've been facing that since 1990 when Lithuania regained its independence. So people are, I think, more resilient on the NATO's eastern flank than some living in the western part of Europe. But I think there is still more work to do because in the end, I think people need to understand that the state would need their qualities in case of any potential threat. Qualities that the people are best at doing. For instance, if you're a doctor, you can contribute by being a medical professional at the time of any threat. If you are an engineer, you can add up to this. So it's not also only about talking about who's going to be on the front lines defending our own countries with guns and military means. There are other ways of contributing to a country's defense, and I think this kind of mentality has to shift because otherwise we face this threat of being attacked and then feeling that we have to leave.
So what do you do? What do you do personally then?
Well, of course, you have to have a backpack ready, just in case.
What's in there?
Well, some stuff, I'm not going to be revealing, the secrets.
Pokemon cards?
Well, you need to have some hobbies, even at the time of any threat. But basically, you have to have a plan B in order to make the plan A work. So whenever you are ready, you have all the things that you are may need at any particular situation. I think you are feeling much more relaxed and prepared. And that level of preparedness makes you feel less anxious. And that involves not only military issues.
Yeah, but I really want to get into this because this is something very real for people. They're wondering, okay, how far does this have to go? We've all seen Netflix dramas about how to flee a situation, but the minister sketched out things that are in place or starting to get in place from local councils. What would the process be? I mean, there's some sort of alarm signal that goes out to the general public. people grab backpacks, people go, where do they go? What's in those backpacks and what should they be prepared for?
Can I give you a small example? We had a big blackout in Portugal and Spain just a little while ago. And what you saw is that having 12 hours without power already creates panic and anxiousness. And all of a sudden, the small candles, the vaccine candles, went for 60 euros a piece. There's always someone that makes money off these kind of
especially in the Netherlands.
things. But that's the kind of things you need to prepare for. No electricity. What do? How do you cook?
Buy a paper map.
Do you have a barbecue? If it's winter and it's cold and your central heating is off, how are you going to keep warm? Those are it's very elementary. I think most people will survive for 72 hours with what they have in their house. But it's the process, as you said, thinking about it, feeling prepared. That creates the real resilience, and that's a great deterrence as well.
And the same question to Linus then. What do you do at home with your family and your 3 kids and your partner?
So I have a gas barbecue, so that's my backup for cooking. And the rest of the neighborhood is welcome, by the way. You can also make it
a general
bonding.
We've got a general invitation.
We have stocks of food that we can use that don't always require water to cook in, because that can be scarce in times. We have loads of water that we can live off. We have a fireplace to keep warm. We have a radio that works on batteries. Battery packs for your phone, because your phone will be empty after 12 hours. And what do you do then? How do you keep in touch? So it's not rocket science. But you might need it at some point in time. And cash.
Cash.
Yeah, that's my tip. I mean, in times when the banks are out of order, when you can't pay electronically, people still see cash as a mechanism by which to buy goods and transfer goods.
Yeah, even in Rotterdam.
Even in Rotterdam.
I've been carried cash for like 9 years.
This is an issue.
No.
Most people don't carry cash.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing to what you were saying. And this goes back to your point that you made earlier about why it's so important to connect these questions with the general public. Hearing you talk about preparedness in Lithuania, it's a totally foreign concept to me because I'm American and because we are surrounded by 2 massive oceans. And the idea of an imminent threat is not something that we live with. And we're very lucky in that sense. And so the conversation that you were having earlier about meeting in person or having Americans go to places like Poland or the Baltic states and seeing what that actually feels like. I was a couple years ago with the German Marshall Fund, another think tank in Washington, and we went to Latvia and Lithuania for the NATO summit. And you have conversations with people and you really feel, you really get a sense of what that is like living very close to a potential threat and how imminent that could be.
And how do you feel? How do you get that sense? Just the language used, the urgency?
The urgency, just the square mileage. These are small countries. The United States is massive. I mean, there's obviously people in the United States that are like preppers and have hundreds of cans of, corn or, canned foods ready for anything. But this is a concept of like being ready for anything that I don't think most people understand or live with. And so hearing people talk about that and seeing it firsthand, I think is a good thing for everyone. And this is, I think, a job for NATO as well, to talk about this and share these kinds of things with the general public, because that's where support ultimately comes from, especially when it comes to defense spending.
I love the word prepper, by the way. I think we should put
preppers.
that in our pocket and run with it.
And
We also
from out
learned
west,
that
we love
Linus has
peppers.
a map on paper. I don't know if that came across, but I thought that was a really good addition. And I think this is exactly why gatherings like the NATO Public Forum and all the meetings that are taking place today and tomorrow are so incredibly important. And not only talking amongst each other, but talking about what we're talking about towards audiences that are just in that outer ring, but that are interested. And I think part of building resilience and building resilient societies is building knowledge and awareness amongst the public at large, and making sure that that conversation about security and about NATO is being had not only here, but also in schools, at work, on the street. And that's very much what we're trying to do.
There will be people watching this thinking, this is scaremongering, this is playing into the hands of say, the political hawks out there, the defense industry. We should be putting money into different initiatives that promote peace and collaboration and understanding and cultural sensitivity.
Yeah, let me first state, and I think it's important, that NATO's toolbox is mainly politically is a military toolbox. Yeah. So the conversation at NATO is often about the hard side of power. But it's very important that we keep on looking across the whole spectrum and that we also discuss anything that's in the diplomatic toolbox and that concerns sort of development aid. I mean, when it's about security, it's the whole spectrum that counts. But here at NATO, we're very much on the hard end of that spectrum. Having said that, the decisions that will be taken at this summit will affect us all. For the Netherlands, about 19 billion euros would have to be freed up to ultimately reach that 5%, building on today's GDP. So let's see what that's like in a few years. That's gonna have to come from somewhere. So having at least some slight understanding of what's at stake, I think is really a responsibility of all of us.
And you'd like to see more public discussions, I suppose, about collective security and people really getting more.
Absolutely, and you don't need to like NATO, but I think we do all have a responsibility to have a sort of general sense of awareness of the situation that we find ourselves in.
In terms of the public's resilience, is that something you keep track of, let's say, in Lithuania? How do you do that?
Well, obviously, you have the opinion polling data, but I'm not sure whether you can trust it, because when you ask a question, if you would leave the country in case of attack, well, that's hypothetical. I think we have to work on the structure in order for people to understand their role in country's defense at the time of an attack. So you have to know where you would need to be at any particular time. And if you know the place, that could be Riflemen's Union, that could be the military, that could be the closest hospital, that could be some volunteering experience that you would engage in. There are varieties of needs at the time of threat. So I think for people, most importantly, they need to have the information. They need to have the level of readiness that would make them feel much more calmer than any sort of panic or provocative behavior that could be inspiring to behave without any rational thinking. Yeah. But I would like to also emphasize, talking about warmongering, we have to recognize that even prior to what you, Rachel, mentioned, in 2014, NATO's spending was way below 2%. The average was way below. Like, we had 3 or 4 countries spending 2%. So NATO was not increasing its defensive capabilities. They were going down for many years. Unfortunately, that did not stop Russia from taking over Crimea, starting the war in Ukraine, and obviously launching the full-scale invasion in 2022. So now we are spending money in order to deter. We're not going to a war, hopefully. That's not what the Baltics would want. Nobody in NATO would like to go to war with Russia. We would like to avoid it. And deterrence, again, works well. That's the principle that's been the basis of NATO alliance. And I hope that it's going to work fine in the future as well. So that's why it was a bit puzzling for me yesterday, and also reading some media headlines, that we are kind of increasing the defense spending in order to please President Trump. No, we agreed on NATO regional plans in Vilnius and then in Washington, D.C., in order to be capable of defending in case of an attack. And in order to fulfill those plans, we have to have the necessary capabilities. And currently we have a huge gap in most of European countries because of the underspending on defense, again, for decades prior to 2014 and 2022. So we have to fill those gaps by spending more and by being ready for any eventuality. Then maybe in the future we could also decrease the defense spending because the geopolitical circumstances would change. But that's not because of President Trump. If he makes us do it, that's great, but that's for our own sake, for our own security, the European security.
Yeah. Did you want to?
Yeah, but just to say that it does help that President Trump actually puts the knife to our throats and says that we have to pay up. Yeah. And I say that as a politician in a country that's not bordering on Russia, and where it is sometimes harder to convince the public that security needs attention and it needs huge investments. So I was there at the summit in 2017, which was basically the start of the ramping up of our defense spending. And I'm happy that we agreed, also my parliament, with a large majority in favor of the 5%. But these are big steps, and I don't think we could have made them as quickly as we have now without the persistence of President Trump. So whatever people might have on commentaries, I think that he's doing our own security a favor by pushing us to invest more.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone, though, is completely on board with how we're getting to that 5%. I mean, let's think about Spain. This is not just a small, this is a large European economy saying, you know, that 5% is unreasonable and counterproductive even. That's the language that they used. So what's your take on that? And Anna?
Well, I think it underlines that this requires very tough decision making, and not only for Spain, for I think 32 NATO allied states, which will have to turn these decisions into practice. And as I said earlier, we're not even there yet. We're just taking the decision and deciding together that this is what's needed exactly to ramp up NATO's own defense plans. That's really why we're doing this. So this is going to be tough. I think it's important that countries find a way out, and so they did. So that's a good sign. We have a signal of unity if all goes well tomorrow at the NATO North Atlantic Council. But it just shows how painful these decisions are, and I think there's no way of making them any prettier than they are. I think it's important to underline the necessity of them. But this requires something from politicians and from citizens and voters. So.
And does it also say something about, I mean, just pushback on the way these like the 5% has been kind of as an ultimatum presented to some countries? I mean, you use the phrase, you know, put a knife to the throat of Europe and said, yeah, you've got to do this. I mean, could that have been achieved, you know, in a more diplomatic way, do you think? Or was that the only option, realistically, given the lack of defence spending over the last...
You know, political leaders have to show leadership, make the necessary decisions on behalf of their societies. So in that regard, I think there is a broad agreement that we have to increase the defense spending. The number is not out of the blue. It's related, again, to real defensive capabilities that need to be built up in the next couple of years in order, again, to deter. And that works fine. This year, I think all of the NATO member states, that was said by General Secretary Rutte, are going to be at 2%. This is a huge achievement already. We've agreed on that in 2014. It took more than a decade for all of the countries to catch up to this. So it takes a while, but unfortunately, we are on borrowed time. Ukraine bought us some time by defending against Russia so successfully and by obviously deterring any attacks on NATO countries. But again, we're on borrowed time. We cannot spend it more on, you know, internal deliberations on whether we should do this or that. Again, we have a clear plan and we have to now fulfill it. And President Trump played a major role in this. And we have to recognize the fact that without President Trump, Spain, you've mentioned maybe Italy and maybe some other countries.
Belgium's also shown some reluctance.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe they wouldn't be at 2% this year. I have my doubts whether that would be the case without an additional push from the US, which was also the case with President Biden and President Trump during his first term and President Bush and others. But maybe this kind of environment and the rhetoric coming from President Trump made it more, you know, realistic at this moment of time.
And Rachel, from a US perspective, how is this, what's playing out here in Europe, how is that received and perceived in the US? I mean, is it even on their radar? Like the general member of the public, let's say?
I think, you know, we say general member of the public, I don't think that they are lying awake at night wondering what Spain is spending on defense. But I do think that the way that Donald Trump, both in the run-up to this presidency and his previous presidency, talked about security, talked about Europe, I think made Europe and European security something that Americans understood better, but not maybe in the best way. Because the way that they looked at Europe now, at least what they were hearing, was that these were a bunch of free riders who were free riding off of America's security guarantee. And remember, Trump is not the first person to say this. This is old news at this point. This goes back decades. But I think part of the reason that we have found ourselves where we are today is because America has been the ultimate guarantor of Europe's security, especially, certainly since the end of the Cold War. And I always say that I think Joe Biden was America's last transatlantic president. Not because I think that this president even, or future presidents, will abandon Europe, but Europe will not orient the U.S. president's foreign policy in the way that it has in the past ever again. I'm confident of that. I'm also confident that this administration stands by its Article 5 agreements, but I'm also confident that after we finish the Global Force Posture Review and after we finish the National Defense Strategy, we will orient troops away from Europe, and Europe has to be ready for that. And I think Europe is preparing for that in the best way that they can.
And just briefly, before we focus back on the summit and a little bit of a look ahead, I get a sense that when you hear Rachel talking about the perception in the US being that there's potentially a lot of free riders over here, piggybacking the security that the US offers, do we, to an extent, does NATO or the government over here, European governments, do we need to also be worried about US public perception of
well, there's only so much that we can do to influence U.S. public perception. That's mainly up to the U.S. administration to work on that perception. But what we can do is show how vital it is in a more multipolarized world that you have friends. And Europe is the U.S.'s best friend, I would still say, economically, where we have the largest economic ties between our two continents, on values, where we share the democratic values that we've upheld for the past 75 years. And now we will also become militarily more useful partners. And so I think we need to balance that out. And then I would say it is totally in the US interest to keep NATO as it is.
Yeah, it was that, in particular, that last point. I don't get that something that's missing from the media narrative at any rate seems to be the benefit to the US of this NATO alliance. The fact that foreign policy here is often crafted almost entirely in the shadow of US foreign policy. So I feel like that's a message that could be ramped up.
Well, thanks for the advice.
We're ramping it up. No, but I mean, how do you agree?
No, I agree. I think we've been working in stovepipes. So on the economical side, we've been in a competition mode. On the military side, we've been absent on the US side and relying totally on the US. On values, we've been aligned. But those things now all need to even out. So it's one package. You need to be on the same page in economic, in trade, in a military cooperation, in the values that you want to project outside of your own territory. And that's what friends do. And we can no longer work from those in different silos. I think that's where we need to get.
All right. OK, we're moving towards the tail end of the talk show. I'd like to talk a little bit about the outcomes that we hope for. Anna, you've already sketched out a few of them together with you, Rachel. Linus, what other topics, apart from defence spending, are likely to be addressed at this over the next couple of days?
Well, obviously, I hope that Ukraine is going to be a focus because President Zelensky is coming and hopefully he's going to have a chance to meet some of the leaders, including the US president. We have to have a plan on how to support Ukraine in the foreseeable future because, as I've mentioned before, Ukraine is successful in defending itself. We know that Russia took less than 1% of Ukrainian territory over the last 18 months or so, which means that they don't have a strategic advantage and they are not, going to take all of Ukraine in the future unless we kind of take a step back. And hopefully Europe is going to pitch in because maybe the levels of US support are going to dwindle. And we've seen some examples of that in terms of financial support. The military support is raining down as well. But then Europe has to step up and provide because we have a great ally now. Ukraine is fighting on our behalf. We don't need to send our soldiers to the front lines to tackle the threat. Ukrainians are doing that themselves. They're also increasing their industrial capacity, building as many drones as any other country wouldn't be able to. So we have to look at the future of European security where Ukraine is going to play an essential role. So what I'm going to be looking at is the atmosphere. And hopefully the atmosphere, the handshakes, the face expressions are going to be positive vis-a-vis Ukraine, because that could lead to some lasting decisions.
And in concrete terms, though, what's the minimum you want agreed to help Ukraine at this summit?
Well, I think that's not going to happen, but I think each country should contribute at least 0.25% of their GDP to Ukrainian defensive effort and the survival of the state. 0.25. That's not a lot. That's not a lot, but unfortunately...
I'd like to see that across the board.
Across the board, but unfortunately the current average is way lower than that. And you can clearly see that countries that are closer to Ukraine and Russia geographically contribute more than those that are a little bit further away, which is in some ways natural, but I think we have to take continent security as a whole. It's not like we can talk about Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe. It's Europe, European security. And obviously, if NATO's eastern flank is threatened, everybody would feel the consequences, as we do with the war raging in Ukraine at the moment.
Mr. Van Wil, what would do you think about that hope for...
Well, I think we're doing pretty well on the support to Ukraine, although we're not an Eastern European ally, but we are continuing to contribute also in real capabilities when it comes down to Panzer howitzers, F-16s.
Are we at that 0.25?
Yeah, I think we're above the 0.25. I just heard the Norwegian Minister of Defense, they're at 1.6%. They're bordering Russia, but they haven't been in a security mindset as we've seen. So I think there are bright spots. I do agree that Ukraine is fighting our fight and that we need to help them in that fight. Yeah, hopefully something will come out. I'm happy that President Zelensky is already here in The Hague. He arrived late last night. He will be addressing Parliament here. He will be attending the dinner tonight at the palace close by.
But he's not on the programme at the summit.
No, but that's not too strange. If there's only one session, then it's not strange to have a session that's allies only. I mean, normally you have multiple formats, and then you have one with Ukraine and Georgia, as we had in the past. That's the one that President Trump disrupted in 2017. Or you have one with the Indo-Pacific partners, one with the EU. Now there's only one session, and then it's not unreasonable to have a session only with the members of the club.
Okay. Rachel, your thoughts on what else should be discussed at this summit?
Well, I understand that there's probably frustration both on behalf of Zelensky and Europeans that he's not wrapped into the discussions in a more official kind of way. But I actually think that's a good thing for him, because I don't see a scenario where having Zelensky sitting at a table next to Trump or with Trump at the table goes well. I just don't see it. I think Ukraine's future depends on how Europe decides to step up to the plate. I don't see the United States backing away completely, but it's not in our hands anymore. Certainly not the way that it was during Biden's administration. And this is why I think I was partially so frustrated by the outcomes of the summit last year, because in the communique, I think it was in the communique, it certainly was talked about a lot, that Ukraine's bridge to NATO was short and well lit. I don't think that's true. It's long and it's dark. And so that future is dependent upon what Europe decides to do now. And so having those conversations on the side without the United States, I actually think is a better outcome for the future of Ukraine and Europe. But that said, the
communique last time around was very detailed. It was long and it set out steps.
Yeah, but
and the soundings now are that it's going to be kind of on the back of a postage stamp.
Sure. I mean, the hard work, no matter what is included in a communique, the hard work starts when you go back to the Capitol. And the hard work starts when you go back to NATO headquarters. And you really decide how are we going to reach 3.5% on hard security and 1.5% on these sort of like tangential security issues. It's good to show unity around a table, but the second that these communiques come out, especially the second that Europeans sign on to 5%, you are giving the Trump administration and potentially another future Republican administration a cudgel with which to hit you with. And so you better be ready to not just put pen to paper, but figure out where these costs are going to come from and where this defense spending is going to come from. Because as we know, it's these taglines that I really don't like. This is not the best way to measure the value of an ally, in my opinion, but it's what we've come up with and it's the best we can do as of now. So you better be ready to answer these hard questions, I think.
Yeah. I think it's also important to underline that this summit is about burden sharing, so how we shoulder the burden together, but also about burden shifting. And how Europe will need to prepare for a future where NATO leans more on European capabilities, on European stuff, on European troops. And that process has already started, but will need to be given a real push to ultimately guarantee the survival of this important system that we've built together. Yep.
And is there anything else you'd like to see on the discussed here, or a particular outcome?
Yeah, so I think, like many, I would have liked to have seen more Ukraine on the agenda. But I think the way in which the stage is now given to Mr. Zelensky and various other ministers is a clever way of showing how important and how vitally existential Ukraine is to our security.
Yeah. And as someone who's been there before, you've been on the inside of this the security bubble and the public forum. What actually gets discussed? I mean, we've talked about what we want. What actually gets discussed in those in the meeting rooms and in the corridors? And you've already talked about how important body language is. And what should we be looking out for, and what will get discussed?
So many things, and I think the organizers have already made a big accomplishment, because the coffee is great. And coffee really matters. I mean, this is not a joke, because most of the conversations take place outside of the TV studios, outside of the stage, because that's where you build up the relationship. And I think this kind of every NATO summit is in essence a confidence building measure. We have to talk, we have to make decisions, but we have to also recognize one another as friends and partners. So that's why I hope that the atmosphere, again, the face expressions, the hand gestures are going to be positive, because that's going to be sending a very serious message, maybe to some extent even a more serious one than the final declaration to the political elite, but also to the societies about the state of NATO as an alliance. Because there's always this doubt whether NATO could survive, right? There was always this discussion whether NATO is obsolete or not. And I think we have to reaffirm the importance of the alliance in every way possible. And those small things really do matter. And I hope that some of the issues are going to be not necessarily resolved, but at least kind of put aside, including, discussions about NATO countries not being in the best relationship with one another for some reason related to big islands or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, and bearing in mind how important mood is, Rachel, President Trump is on his way. He seems to be on a high, at least judging by his Truth Social posts. What do you expect from him here over the next couple of days?
I actually think it's going to be a good summit. I know there's a lot of trepidation about what he might do, what he might say. But again, in his mind, in his administration, it's been a successful week for them. Getting Europeans to sign on to 5% is seen as a success as well. And so, barring any snafu, which I don't think will happen, I think it's pretty well choreographed at this point. I think we should expect a much smoother summit than we've seen from him in the past.
But you've got to have trepidation as well on a personal.
Of course. Absolutely. You never know what's going to happen. Yeah. But as I said before, we've seen this movie a few times now. Okay, Europeans know how to deal with
In that movie,
Trump.
what's the nightmare scenario that we want to watch out for?
I mean, the nightmare scenario is that there's some off-the-cuff comment about the U.S. not standing by its Article 5 agreements or pulling troops out soon. I mean, those are the things that I think are tough for people to deal with. But those aren't things that I'm expecting to happen. We should expect maybe some jabs or some side comments, as we always hear from him. But again, Macron, Meloni, Merz also. These people all know how to deal with the president at this point. This has become a well-choreographed back and forth, and so it's less up for grabs, I think. So I'm not as worried as I was in the past.
Yeah?
Fully agree.
Fully agree.
Well, I think we have a working understanding with President Trump and most European allies, and I think we're in a good place, actually.
Yeah. So, and the blue sky scenario, ideal scenario is he says something like, "Let's make NATO great again." And maybe even brings a new hat. Maybe brings a new hat.
A blue one.
Would love that.
That would be great. Yeah. And your final hope, Anna. I mean, you wanted to make this public forum super transparent for everyone, give people a feel of what goes on behind the scenes. When the live stream ends and the snacks run out, what's the one message that you hope really sticks with people?
Well, let's hope the coffee machine keeps on working until we're all done. No, I think whatever happens, and I'm glad the level of confidence on the other side of the table is quite high. Whatever happens, I think it's important that we keep our heads cool and that we keep on and analysing what's happening, so we can all place this summit into a bigger context also as we move into the difficult decision making that will come in autumn.
And I've one final plea, if I might make it, that I hope that during the next summit that me and my colleagues that are responsible for this civilian resilience side are also part of the conversation. So as we conclude that security is not only hard defense, but also soft defense, and also preventing hybrid or sabotage attacks, I think that needs a place at the table in our collective security organization that NATO is.
Why doesn't it have a place at the table now?
We never meet. I got together a core group of Baltics, Nordics, ministers that have this responsibility. It's different in every country. In Sweden, you have a minister of civil defense. In Lithuania, I think it's a minister of the interior. So there's all different players, and we don't naturally meet on this topic because it's new. And that's what we need to work on. And I think NATO is a great place to gather and talk about these topics.
And what would it look like to have that fully embedded here at NATO, like a dedicated panel?
No, really being part, like the ministers of defense gather on a periodic timetable, the ministers of foreign affairs do, so should we on the resilience side, because we're part of the same package.
Okay, well listen, thank you very much. We can hear the music, and we all know what that means at the Oscars. It means the same thing here as well. We have to wrap up. Thank you all for your insights, and back home, thank you for joining us here. You can join us again at 12:40 Dutch time for a show devoted to the hot topic of defense spending. In the meantime, that's it from us here at Studio Bravo, because it's now time for the official opening of NATO Public Forum 2025. So let's hand back to Donna at Studio Alpha.
Welcome to the plenary stage here at the NATO Public Forum. To those of you entering in the room right now, thank you so much for being here today, and a warm welcome to our global audience tuning in online. I'm Donna Farazan. I am your Master of Ceremonies for today and tomorrow's plenary program here at the NATO Public Forum, and it is a true honor to be here with you all today. We are now ready to officially kick off the day here at the NATO Public Forum, NATO's flagship public event taking place alongside the summit of heads of state and government. We are joined by an incredible audience. As you can see, over 500 of you are in the room right now, and thousands watching from across the world. To officially open today's proceedings, it is my great honor to welcome the Secretary General of NATO. He will be joined in conversation with Benedikt Franke, Vice Chairman and CEO of the Munich Security Conference. Take it away. Welcome.
That's the hot seat for you. Very good. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us, not only here in the room, but as you've heard, the many people in large numbers online across the Alliance. Goedemorgen to all. As somebody who knows a little about events, people say, can I just start by congratulating the Public Diplomacy Division and the 3 Dutch partners for putting together quite a show. What a great public forum. I just hope all of you forget how smooth it was to get in here until you come to Munich in February. So to start us off this morning, we are honored to have the Secretary General with us. We know this is probably the busiest day of the year, so thank you for taking 30 minutes out of your busy schedule. And it's particularly brave of you, because other SGs that have sat down with me in the recent past have, hopefully temporarily, ended up as finance ministers in Norway. Now desperately trying to find the money that you are calling for. May this destiny be spared for you.
Which has some money.
So let me tell you all how this is going to work the next 27 minutes and 20 seconds. I came prepared with many really clever and really hard questions. Yes, and I don't have to, because your staff has just told me that a week ago you asked citizens across the Alliance to hand in questions. Luckily for me, they're actually better than my own. Unluckily for you, they're actually harder. So I will warm you up with 2 questions before we get to the tough cookies. and then we'll try to get through as many as we can in the remaining minutes. So, Secretary General, you have taken the take your work home approach to a totally new level. How does it feel to host your first ever summit here in your hometown, The Hague?
I feel so proud that it is in my hometown, and some Dutch journalists think that this was very well prepared. In 2022, when we started with NATO to have this lobby to have the summit, this was at the Madrid summit, to have the NATO summit in The Hague, we thought about the 75th in 2024. But the US basically said, well, no, never. Never go to Washington, you can get the one after in 2025. Okay, also fine, but I was not able to plan for a summit and elections and for me become a Secretary General all at the same time. So, yes, I'm a brilliant planner, but not so good. But it feels really great to host a summit here in The Hague. Now, not me personally, it is now, of course, Dick Schoof doing it, the new Prime Minister, but I'm really proud. I live in this city, I was born in this city, I was raised in this city. I love this city, so it's very special.
So central to the summit is, and that is also very clever, the Hague investment plan, branding wherever one looks, as agreed by the defense ministers a little earlier this week. Talk us through the plan. Why is it important and what does it mean for the alliance?
Yeah, this is really important. And let me just highlight what happened yesterday. Germany announcing that Germany wants to reach the 3.5% of core defense spending, and therefore the overall 5%, not in 2035. They want to reach it in 2029. Sweden announced last week they want to reach in the coming years the 3.5%. Norway, under the wise leadership of course, Jonas Steur, the Prime Minister, but also with the help of the Finance Minister, one Jens Stoltenberg, we know him very well, will reach the 3.5 and therefore the 5% in the coming years. So these are the first announcements now coming in. We know that countries like Poland and Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, they are very close, already over the threshold, and many others will follow. So, and why is this important? Because we know that Russia is reconstituting itself at a pace, at a speed which is really staggering and frightening. And so we have to stand ready. If we don't, we cannot defend ourselves in 3 to 5 years from now. Today they know if they try anything, our reaction will be devastating. But we have to make sure that in 3 to 5 years they won't try. So if we want to prevent war, spend more, peace through strength, we can put every label on it, but they are all true. So this is really historic.
And I mean, we keep talking about defense spending, but also keep talking about the defense industry. We've been talking about the defense industry for ages. What's different this time?
What's different this time is that it is serious and that the defense industry now finally knows what we need. So in the past, when I came in October, we had a big meeting in November with the CEOs of the big defense industry companies in these beautiful residents in Brussels. They told me, yeah, Mark, but we need 10-year contracts. I told them, we can't, because in the US, you have a yearly cycle. In Europe, you will have election-to-election cycle. Forget about 10-year contracts. But now what we have is the spending plans. We know the money is there. Take Germany again. They will more or less double their money spent on defense compared between 2021 and 2029. So that is from about 70 billion to 150 billion. This is just one country in NATO doing this. So we know the money is there, and because we have finalized the NATO defense planning process, where Pierre von Jay, who is sitting here as the Allied Commander Transformation, but of course also the International Staff Headquarters, with all the allies, has worked very hard on this to assess what are the capabilities each of the allies need to deliver if Russia or anyone else would attack us. From there, we came to the conclusion that we needed a 3.5% core defense spending, so the industry now knows this. What we are seeing at the moment is that finally, but this can still be done at a more rapid pace, they are putting in the extra production lines, the extra shifts, but again, more needs to happen. We will have an industry forum later today. I'm constantly in contact with the defense industry, so I'm hopeful we will get there. But the Russians are really doing this figure. I think it is for them the 152, and they are producing in 3 months what the whole of NATO is producing in a year, and they are 25 times smaller as an economy than the overall NATO economy. So this is not sustainable long term. So we have to ramp that up. And you might say, yeah, but you also need drones and AI. Absolutely, we will do all that. Yes, exactly. No, but we will absolutely do all that. But every general is telling me, and please not yes that I'm right, that still, when it comes to warfare, the base is stockpiles of ammunition. And yes, then we also need, of course, the drones and the AI and all the new technology.
You feel warmed up now?
Yes.
So we'll go to the questions.
Oh, this was the easy.
Yeah.
This was the easy part.
So I think you'll see them back on the screen here. We'll try to get through as many of them as possible. The first one is from José Pereira from Portugal. With the US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, alongside the Israel-Iran war, the Hamas-Israel conflict, the Ukraine-Russia war, how can NATO defend its allies?
NATO can defend its allies by two things. One is a deal. A deal we struck in 1949 when NATO was established that an attack on one will be an attack on all. But not just that. That's important. That's the Article 5. But what we have in NATO is the structures, the command structures, the intelligence structures, everything in place to back that up. So it's not just that I will tell you, I will come to your rescue if you get attacked. And we'll see then when it happens how I will do that. We have everything in place, everything arranged, everything organized to make sure that we can do that. So NATO was not established only to fight the Russians if they would attack us. They are our most immediate long-term threat, immediate and long-term. But we also see China reconstituting itself. We see what China, North Korea and Iran are doing in supporting the war effort of Russia, the unprovoked war against Ukraine. So this is very serious business. Iran providing the drones technology to Russia and the drones themselves. And we see the impact they are having now in Ukrainian cities every day, killing innocent people. So this is all interconnected. So what we need to do is to make sure that we have the plans, the people, the money in place, and then we can protect our 32 allies.
Perfect. You just mentioned people in place. Emmanuel Jacob from Belgium has asked how to translate increased defense spending in additional troop numbers, including better recruitment practices and retention.
Very good question, Emmanuel. And this is happening as we speak in most NATO allied countries. I know from my own country that the State Secretary here in this country is working on this day and night, how to make sure that you have actually the people in place to make it happen. You will see some countries moving to general conscription, other countries are taking different views on this. Of course, this is for each ally to decide how they will do this when it comes to the HR policies, but everything is geared to make sure that we have the troop numbers. We heard from Germany, again, sorry that I come back to that example.
I like that.
Yeah, and I know, and it's not to slime with you,
but it's working.
It's working. You're really very kind. They need, in the short term, about next time 60,000 troops, and longer term it will be even more. So that means that you need the recruitment process in place, you need to have the salary structures in place, the money, etc., etc. But of course that's there now, because if you spend not 70 billion but 150 billion in the case of Germany on defense, then the money is there also to improve the salaries you pay to your men and women in uniform.
So, Jean Cotalin from the United States of America says Poland shows that European publics remain deeply reluctant to paying these costs that you've just mentioned of higher defense spending. Are we at risk of a NATO-SATO gap?
No, I would not agree with Seen on this, because when you look at the latest opinion polling, you see that many people, and it is getting to really high numbers, are supporting the fact that yes, there is a direct threat from Russia, that yes, if we do not invest now, we are really at risk that the Russians might try something against NATO territory in 3, 5 or 7 years, and therefore there is a large-scale support. I see it in my own country. Polling data this morning in NRC newspaper in this country saying that there is now a majority of population really supporting the extra money spent on defense, because this is the great thing about democracies. You cannot fool people. So the people living in this country and all other NATO allies, they know that there is a change. That we are not living in happy land after the burning wall kingdom. We are living in much more dangerous times, and there are enemies, adversaries who might want to. We have to make sure that we defend our beautiful way of life and systems and our values.
In Munich, we love the elephant in the room, as you know from your many times there. There is, a lot being said about our enemies, adversaries, rivals, but there also seem to be a few doubts about our friends. And let me pull up the next question. Maria Elena Guzman from the United Kingdom in Spain. How do you assess the reliability of the United States as a NATO ally? And what steps can NATO take to maintain unity and trust within the alliance?
Yeah, this question I got many times, particularly since January. And basically were two questions. Question number one was, Mark, is the US still with us? Yes, they are. You might want to turn on your television when Emmanuel Macron is visiting the Oval Office, when Keir Starmer is visiting the Oval Office, when Giorgia Meloni is... Hey, by the way, when I was visiting, you might want to see that footage. There is total commitment by the US President and the US senior leadership to NATO. However, it comes with an expectation. And the expectation is that we will finally deal with this huge pebble in the shoe, this huge irritant, which is that we are not spending enough as Europeans and Canadians. And they want us to equalize with what the US is spending. And when it comes to this famous 5%, the US is basically they're there. When you look at what they spend on core, but also on all the defense and security related investments. But they want to equalize what they are spending with us. And for us, of course, the main argument is not to equalize. Yes, that is important because it is fair. But the real reason to do this, the first reason to do this, is the Russian threat. So these things come together. And then the second question was, okay, so the US will stay with us. They are committed to Article 5, we believe you, Mark. But hey, then they might pull down the troop numbers in Europe without making pre-announcements. And Sakir, our most senior commander in NATO, might be European. Brits, German leading the military side of the alliance. There are many reasons why it is an American, because America is delivering all these enablers to NATO, also in Europe. So you want a US senior general to lead the military alliance on the military side. I said, well, okay, I don't think it will happen. And hey, guess what? The new Supreme Allied Command has been announced, and last time I checked his passport, it was US. So that didn't happen. So my message to my European colleagues is stop worrying so much. Start to make sure that you get investment plans done, that you get the industrial base up and running, that the support for Ukraine remains at a high level. Luckily, it is still today. I mean, this is what you should work on, and stop running around being worried about the US. They are there, they are with us.
Okay. There are definitely other places we need to be worried about. Next elephant in the room, Ukraine. Let me combine two questions. Here from the Netherlands, Vincha Kolbeck says, with global attention shifting to the Middle East, how is NATO ensuring that Ukraine remains a priority? And later on, we have a question from Misha Ayev from Ukraine. How close are we to the solution of the Ukrainian conflict? And let me add a third bit to that question. We were fortunate enough to have the Ukrainian foreign minister with us yesterday at dinner at this wonderful Klingendahl Institute. And
Andrei Sibia was there.
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
So, and he said that his great hope for the summit, obviously, is that the president gets some face time, but also that there will be concrete commitments to Ukraine. So what can you already say? How close are we to the solution? Will there be concrete commitments? And will the Middle East shift have a negative impact?
If we would not be able to deal with, yes, the Middle East, which is very big and commanding all the headlines, and Ukraine at the same time, we should not in the business of politics and military at all. If you can only deal with one issue at a time, that would be, then let other people take over. So I think we're all in this room and listening in, and the senior politicians and military people are able to deal with two issues at the same time. I don't think that's too much to ask. And by the way, we can, and the evidence is there, because at this moment, the Europeans and the Canadians have pledged for this year 35 billion in military support to Ukraine. Last year it was just over 50 billion for the full year. Now before we reach half year, it is already at 35 billion. And there even are saying it's already close to 40 billion. The numbers I can now commit to are over 35, but I hope of course that the one saying it's close to 40 is right. But at least it is over 35, so that's fantastic news. And that means that the support for Ukraine is still at a level even higher than it was last year. And we also see a shift of the burden from the US more to the Canadians and the Europeans, which I think is fair, that we take a bigger share of this burden as Europeans and Canadians from the United States. When it comes to peace, I cannot predict when it will happen. I want to commend President Trump for breaking the deadlock. When he came in office, he started a dialogue with President Putin, and I always thought that was crucial. And it's only one leader who could break the deadlock originally, and that had to be the American president, because he's the most powerful leader in the world and leading 25% of world GDP and the mightiest and most powerful military in the world. So him doing that, breaking that deadlock, was very important. But this doesn't mean that we are now getting to a deal immediately. It will take time. But it helps, and in the meantime we have to make sure that Ukraine has everything to stay in the fight, that Ukraine is in the strongest possible position when real talks would start. So I'm not talking about these talks which this Russian historian is now leading, going back to 1,000 years ago, and then who was responsible for whatever in Istanbul now twice. I mean, this is not serious business, and it was very proud of the Ukrainians that they said, the senior team there, with the foreign minister, the defense minister, the chief of staff, so they took it serious. But clearly Russia was not serious, but hopefully serious talks will start in the near future. And then we have to make sure that whatever the long-term ceasefire or the peace deal on Ukraine will be, that it is lasting, that it is durable, that Vladimirovich Putin will never ever again try to catch 1 square kilometer, or for the Americans 1 square mile of Ukraine.
Let me add, yes, I think that deserves a round of applause. Let me add one more quick point on Ukraine, if I may.
That's not on the list.
I know this. You took my cards away, so how could I? See, what Andrei said yesterday is that for the past 3 years, or 2.5 years, Ukraine, they've been security consumers within Europe. But they're slowly but surely turning into security producers. What is it that we at NATO, that you at NATO HQ are learning from the conflict in Ukraine?
Enormously, a lot. So we have this joint organization now in Poland, JTEC, which is capturing all the lessons from the war. And of course we are learning day in, day out from what the Ukrainians are doing. We're also learning that and seeing that the Russians are copying what the Ukrainians are doing in 2 or 3 weeks. So it is a learning cycle which basically takes 2 or 3 weeks at a time. It forces us at NATO and in each allied country to really reconsider things through all our basic defense concepts compared to 3.5 years ago. So that's one. Second, don't forget, Ukraine is one of the biggest producers of weapons in Europe. It has a huge defense industrial base. The problem is, there is an untapped potential of about $35 billion, which they still could develop. And the good thing now is, we mentioned Jens Stoltenberg before, and Norway, but that we also mentioned Denmark and Lithuania, that many countries who have seen their own stockpiles getting more and more depleted, are now also investing in this defense industrial base in Ukraine, so that Ukraine can therefore produce the weapons it needs to produce for the warfare. It's also helping them economically, it's helping them long term, because the defense industrial base will be there after the war, also of course for Europeans and other allies to buy from. Let's not forget, by the way, that Turkey has a very big defense industrial base. We sometimes forget what they have. I visited some of their companies, it's really impressive. That's one of the reasons we have to make sure that the Turkish defense industrial base is as closely connected as possible to the UK, Norway and the European Union. Let's not have these fences drawn up within NATO. It won't help. But back to Ukraine. And then of course we have the Czech ammunition initiative, which started now 1.5 years ago, in February 2024, and which is really successful and making sure that 155 ammunition and other deliveries into Ukraine keep on going.
Let's go back to the questions. I'm not sure how the UK sneaked in the second question, but they did. How does the Secretary General, i.e. view the situation on the alliance southern border, given Russian influence in Africa, persistent conflict, climate change, fragile governments and migration?
This is one of the reasons why we constantly have to do the 360 degrees. Because, as I said, our long-term direct threat is Russia, but it is not the only threat. There might be others. China is not having now 4 of its defense companies in the top 10 defense companies worldwide, only because of the parades in Beijing. They might want to do some stuff with their military capabilities going forward. And we know the risks that we run with Taiwan, and that if that would happen, then obviously Xi Jinping will call his junior colleague in the Kremlin and tell them, hey, Vladimir, I back you up so much now. you know, who is really in power in this relationship. It's not you, it's the one on this side of the line. Can you keep them busy in Europe? So that's China and Russia. Then when it comes to the southern border, it's crucial. And this is something Spain and Portugal and Italy and Greece have consistently fought for. That NATO is very much concentrating on the southern border. We are opening an office in Jordan. Of course, we have the NATO mission in Iraq. We are helping in the G5 Sahel. Mauritania is a close partner, for example. We know that whole region, when you look at the map, China and Russia are rapidly, when it comes to Africa, in the G5 Sahel, but also generally Africa, mid and north of Africa, the Chinese and the Russians are rapidly gaining influence. So let's not be naive. That's why we have a special representative. I personally am a special representative for the southern neighborhoods. No, sorry, for the south, and therefore the southern neighborhoods and the southern flank. And he is constantly traveling, this guy doing really excellent, traveling all these countries and making sure that wherever NATO can help.
Perfect. We've around 5 minutes left. 2 more questions, I think, both of them.
After?
The Prime Minister.
Oh,
the real Prime
we
Minister.
can take more time. No. I'm kidding.
So, next question from Estonia, Eva Zula. How do we speed up the adoption of emerging and disruptive technologies, including for use in missions and operations?
Well, this is crucial. And as I said, yes, this is all happening, but let's not forget about the base, and that's the ammunition, because I'm really worried about ammunition. I'm happy that the UK is now building 6 new ammunition factories as part of their defense plans launched 3 weeks ago. But of course, when it comes to emerging and disruptive technologies, we have to be at the forefront here. Again, the war in Ukraine, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, is giving Ukraine and the whole of NATO a lot of insights when it comes to exactly this question. We also know that, of course, this has an impact on cyber, on hybrid. It's one of the reasons why this is on the agenda today and tomorrow, hybrid, cyber, etc. To make sure that as an alliance, we can not only fight the visible wars, but we are also able to confront any adversary when it comes to that. And one of the things Pierre did together with Christopher Voting when on the 25th of December we had this attack between Finland and Estonia on the sea cables, is that he brought together this Baltic Sentry activity, which is now sailing the Baltic Sea. The Russians hate it, they really hate it, so I love it. And this is basically to say, well, hey, guys, you have all these submersion ships. They constantly lose their anchors, and then they have that anchor slap over the seabed for 100 miles. We might do a support mission into Russia to teach your commercial fleet how to sail those ships, because it seems to be very difficult for you guys, if there is no other intention. And one of the things I learned with Baltic Sentry is that when something is called an activity and not a mission, you do not need 32 approval. So I said, from now on, you'll have activities and no missions, because it speeds up the decision-making process. They brought together this whole activity, I should not say mission, in 10 days. And this was, I think, one of the fastest deployed activities in NATO history.
Yeah. Perfect. Italy has also somehow managed to sneak in 2 questions. I'm not going to take this one, I'm taking one that fits here. It says, in a world like today's, how does NATO plan to increase its defense against cyber attacks? And how specifically will artificial intelligence be used to pursue this target?
Yeah, well, obviously this is key. So I've been personally speaking to technology experts on this, but of course that's me as an historian trying to understand that new technology. Don't leave it with me. But obviously we have experts in NATO, in the military side, in the international staff, in the military committee, led by Admiral Dragonis. So we have these experts in the building, and I think that's particularly crucial. And again, this is to the underlying issue of cyber, hybrid, and making sure that that our adversaries know, of course, what we do against them. I don't know, that's for allies. but it is from them to us that we stand ready, that we are not naive.
See, I've wondered how Italy sneaked in so many questions. Now I see the Admiral, now I know it's all clear.
Pino is an Italian passport.
See, I think we have time for one very quick question and an even quicker answer. Justin Anthony Rogan from Canada. Do you think it'd be possible for a Canadian like me to become NATO Secretary General one day?
Absolutely, Justin. I have no idea. It's not Justin Trudeau, I think. No, it's just...
Asking for a friend.
No. This is absolutely possible. I think there is a tradition that the NATO Secretary, I think, is non-American, not only European. I think so far it has not been Canadians. But the idea always has been, I think, from the start, that it is wise because of the US presence in Europe with all the enablers to have the most senior military commander to be an American. And that will continue to be so over the next years, and then for the Secretary General to be a European. But I'm not looking at the Dutch ambassador to NATO. Is there anything against the Canadian one day to become Secretary General? No, I couldn't think of it. So, Justin, apply, but not now. There is no vacancy.
There is no vacancy. There is also no more time. No, Secretary General, many thanks. That was very good. Good luck. Fingers crossed for the next 2 days. Make the most of it. Thank you for mentioning Germany so often. I hope my own government has taken note. Yeah, I get lots of brownie points for this, so this is great. And we now have Dutch Prime Minister up with us. We're honored to have you here. You need to leave straight away, I've been told, but you now have to work. Over to you, Prime Minister. Yeah, we're done. Ceremony.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a proud moment for the Netherlands as a founding member of NATO. Because this is the first time that a NATO summit is taking place in our country. Now you might say, after more than 75 years, it's about time. And it would be the first to agree. Our alliance was founded on the principles of democracy, liberty and the rule of law, as laid down in the Washington Treaty. And the Netherlands has always been deeply aware that without transatlantic cooperation in NATO, our country would not be what it is today, safe, free and prosperous. So let me assure you that hosting this summit is a form of burden sharing we're only too glad to take on. This summit brings together NATO allies and partners from all over the world, from Europe to the Indo-Pacific, from the US and Canada to Ukraine. And we are delighted to welcome you all here. It's wonderful to see so many people gathered here in The Hague. This is also a proud moment for the city of The Hague, the international city of peace and justice. A role that goes all the way back to 1899, when it hosted the first Hague Peace Conference. And consequently, this is also a proud moment for me, as Prime Minister of the Netherlands. We've been preparing for this event for quite some time now. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the effort that has gone into organizing this summit. Many thousands of police officers and members of the Dutch Armed Forces and countless other professionals and volunteers have worked tirelessly to make it happen. Today it is happening, and that's a great feeling. Now, as you may know, the Netherlands is a trusted supplier of NATO Secretary General. Mark Rutte being the fourth Dutchman to hold this position. The first was Dirk Stikker, who was in office the first half of the 1960s. In 1966, in the section of his memoirs on NATO, he wrote this: "We cannot build international policy on the quicksand of idealistic hope. We must accept the hard truth. We must do everything possible to ensure that we are strong enough economically and militarily to be able to defend our freedom." It's an uncomfortable thought to realize that he could have written these lines today. The challenge he set with those words still rings true. The world is in turmoil, and we cannot afford to be naive. We need to face facts and accept the hard truth. And NATO must ensure that we are strong enough to defend our freedom. You could even argue that the task facing us today is harder than it has ever been in the history of the Alliance. For generations, the real threat of war in our part of the world seemed barely conceivable, even at the height of the Cold War. For generations, peace, security and freedom could be taken for granted. And for generations, that's what we actually did. But in the past few years, the situation has been turned on its head. There is now a renewed sense of urgency, a fresh realization that we have to defend our way of life, our fundamental values, and above all, our freedom.